conferences. She had more views than like Alcaraz, Sinner, Novak.
Philippine tennis. I'm the only Filipina in the draw this year. I'm the only Filipina that's ever been in the
Iga Swiatek was defeated by her. Compared to nearly everyone on the WTA Tour, she filled stadiums in Dubai. More people watched her Australian Open press conference on YouTube than Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, Novak Djokovic, and Daniil Medvedev put together. Then, in the most straightforward manner imaginable, Eala'S disclosed something startling. She wants to participate in some competitions but is unable to do so. Her passport is the reason, not an ailment or an excessively low ranking. And for whatever reason, very few tennis media outlets are discussing it. Because there is more to this story than just a delayed visa. In this story, a rising star from the Philippines is compelled to participate in competitions that most elite athletes never even consider, while stars from Europe, America, and Japan are free to travel between nations. Barriers that can subtly sabotage opportunity, preparation, and momentum. What's the scariest part? This has previously occurred in tennis. A gifted athlete who is limited by factors outside of the court rather than skill. However, nobody is making the connection. Eala'S is frequently referred to in the media as a heartwarming tale, a significant Filipino trailblazer, and one of the top 40 in the world. They won't talk about the systemic disadvantage that follows her around. A drawback that is already having an impact on her career in ways that people are only now starting to comprehend. And it all begins with a single number that clarifies everything. With the Philippine passport, Eala'S can enter just about 65 countries worldwide without a visa or with one upon arrival. Now contrast it with the superpowers of tennis. Germany provides access to about 194 nations. France is higher than 190. Japan is almost at the top. Even Singapore, which is located next to Southeast Asia and the Philippines, has access to nearly every nation on the planet. Eala'S, approximately 65. And that figure alters your perspective on her whole career. She must obtain visas in advance for each of the Grand Slam host countries, including the United States, Australia, France, and the United Kingdom. One of the most significant stops on the Asian swing, China, does the same. Every season, the WTA calendar spans dozens of tournaments, and many of those locations need paperwork, embassy approvals, interviews, and waiting periods for holders of Philippine passports. In the meantime, a lot of players from Europe and America can just book a flight and go the following morning without giving it any thought. At this point, the problem becomes a true competitive disadvantage rather than a political one. Tennis schedules are always changing. Overnight injuries occur. Wild cards open abruptly. Just 48 hours before a tournament starts, withdrawals present unanticipated opportunities. Unrestricted travel allows a player to seize that chance right away. When faced with visa obstacles, a player frequently cannot. In professional tennis, that secret advantage can transform careers, yet it never shows up in rankings, statistics, or highlight reels. Additionally, Eala'S has already acknowledged the financial burden those limitations are placing on her. At the 2025 ATABPI and Globe Telecom press conference, Eala'S finally spoke up about the quiet part. She acknowledged that there are tournaments she just does not have the time to attend due to visa constraints, even though she is rated in the top 40 in the world and has become one of the most marketable athletes on the whole WTA Tour. And most people didn't realize how big that remark was. It wasn't annoyance. It wasn't a justification. It was an outright admission of a ceiling imposed on her career, one that many of her competitors will never encounter. She can travel freely throughout Europe thanks to her training base at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain, but once she leaves that area, the obstacles reappear right away. The countries associated with the largest tennis tournaments, Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, and China, continue to demand complete visa applications. Every trip, every season, and every unforeseen change in plans. On paper, what appears to be a travel problem turns into a hidden ranking disadvantage in practice. The scenario seems even more incredible when you consider what Eala'S is producing for women's tennis. Eala might already be the biggest growing talent in women's tennis, according to Sky Sports commentator Gigi Salmon in 2026. One of the tournament's most popular YouTube uploads of the year was a straightforward day-in-the-life film of her at Indian Wells. Every time she competes, tournament executives freely acknowledged that her presence generates attention, engagement, and worldwide interest. John Wertheim, a tennis journalist, then made an even more startling revelation. According to reports, Alex Eala'S pre-match press conference at the Australian Open received more views on YouTube than press conferences with Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, Novak Djokovic, and Daniil Medvedev put together. For a second, consider that a young Filipino player was receiving more online attention than some of the biggest stars in the entire sport. Even though most elite sportsmen never even have to deal with travel limitations, Alex Eala'S level of popularity is no longer typical for a player outside the top 10. She's made a connection with something much greater than tennis. Her practice footage, interviews, and behind-the-scenes recordings provide figures that sometimes even outperform those of the sport's greatest players. Heim was taken aback by it. He freely acknowledged that more people watched Eala'S Australian Open press conference on YouTube than Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, Novak Djokovic, and Daniil Medvedev put together. When combined, that is no longer hype. That is evidence of widespread interest. Nevertheless, the disparity is hard to overlook when you examine her real endorsement portfolio from 2026. Globe Telecom, Nike Babolat, Bank of the Philippine Islands, and a number of significant Filipino companies are among her confirmed sponsors. Yes, there are strong alliances, but they are still largely focused on the Philippine market. In the meantime, European athletes in the same 30 to 40 ranked range frequently have high-end international contracts, with businesses like Rolex, Porsche, Lacoste, and others having strong ties to the European sports scene. Why is there such a difference? Because in today's sports marketing, accessibility is important. For appearances, sponsor activations, and picture shoots, a European athlete can go from Paris to Madrid to Milan in a matter of days without facing significant travel obstacles. Alex Eala isn't always able to roam around so easily. A passport with restricted access has an impact on commercial flexibility in addition to tournament scheduling. When appearances depend on weeks of processing, visa applications, and unpredictable travel schedules, international companies hesitate. The most absurd aspect is that the internet is already aware of how underappreciated she is. Because people truly think someone with her prominence should already be making that much money, viral bogus rumors about huge endorsement deals, from fictitious multi-million-dollar Wilson contracts to phony Emirates sponsorships, spread online. Although the public's response indicated something significant, those deals were not genuine. Even though Alex Eala is already having a superstar-level cultural influence, the tennis industry still views her as an up-and-coming player. The difference between what she contributes to the sport and what the sport returns to her is enormous. And whether people want to acknowledge it or not, the passport issue contributes to the disparity. Oh, and this is the topic that no one in the tennis media appears to be ready to ask. Should the WTA establish a travel support program for players from nations with poor mobility passports? Because Alex Eala'S situation is structural rather than merely uncomfortable. Furthermore, history might repeat itself in the most agonizing way imaginable if the sport ignores it. This is nothing new for the Philippines. Yuka Seiso was born to a Japanese father and a Filipino mother. As the first Filipino athlete to win a major in golf, Seiso became a national hero in 2021 after winning the U.S. Women's Open while competing for the Philippines. She was hailed as the athlete who could motivate a whole generation and the future of Philippine sports. But within just a year, everything was different. Yuka Seiso renounced her Philippine citizenship in 2022 and formally decided to represent Japan. Her responses stunned the nation when people questioned why. It had nothing to do with money. It had nothing to do with identity. It has to do with the passport. Seiso acknowledged that time management and simpler international travel were important considerations in her choice during a news appearance in Manila. The Philippine Gulf Federation used a Japanese passport to formally certify it. Without having to deal with visa applications, embassy delays, and unknown schedules all the time, she could tour the world. Since the competitive advantage was evident, no one held her accountable. Her travel privileges apparently increased overnight from about 65 countries to well over 190. In an instant, more than 100 additional locations became more accessible. There is less paperwork, waiting, risk, and competition freedom. The argument was further supported by what transpired subsequently. Yuka Seiso went on to represent Japan and win another U.S. Women's Open. Her talent, commitment, or sense of patriotism did not cause the Philippines to lose her. They lost her because passports govern movement, which is rewarded by international sports. That's why the current scenario involving Eala'S feels so crucial. Because if these obstacles persist, tennis may soon have to deal with the same unsettling situation. A generational athlete competing in a system that subtly offers other players advantages she may never fully have while carrying the dream of an entire country. Because the entire story about Eala'S has been unfinished from the start if all of this is true, as the data clearly indicates. People see a young tennis player who represents the Philippines' hopes, a feel-good underdog tale, and a rising tennis superstar. However, they are overlooking the reality that lies beneath it all. Eala'S now has nearly the same position as Yuka Seiso did in 2021. In her sport, she is the greatest athlete her nation has ever produced. In terms of money and competitiveness, she is about to enter the most significant years of her career. Additionally, she is dealing with the same structural obstacle that forced another Filipino celebrity to make an unfeasible decision. The distinction is that Eala'S has stated frequently and in public that she does not wish to go. She expressed her emotional connection to Filipino supporters worldwide in interviews with Front Office Sports and on the Surf podcast. She said she couldn't find anywhere else the enthusiasm, support, and vitality of the Filipino community. Furthermore, there's no reason to question her honesty. She obviously means it, but that's precisely what makes this story so convoluted. Yuka Seiso also enjoyed representing the Philippines until the competitive realities of international travel made it more difficult to overlook the choice. And that is the true purpose of this discussion. This has nothing to do with speculating that Eala'S will eventually switch passports. She has stated that she won't, and her statements should be respected. This is about acknowledging the unseen price she pays each season to keep playing for her nation in a system that wasn't created with all players in mind. Because last-minute tournament chance could not be reached in time, the ranking points might have been lost. The training days were forfeited for appointments at the embassy and visa processing. Instead of in-person meetings, the sponsor events were attended via video calls. The uncertainty of travel flexibility makes it more difficult to establish international alliances. A stat sheet does not show any of those challenges. While most of her competitors advance in the sport without ever having to consider it, they collectively impose a silent tax on her career that compounds year after year. None of them are visible other from her ranking. Raymond Suarez, a former player for the Philippine Davis Cup, made a statement in 2025 that strikes to the core of this problem. He claims that the issues that Filipino athletes face today are the same ones that they faced decades ago, a lack of systemic support that forces families to shoulder the burden themselves. When you look at Eala'S journey, it is hard to ignore the fact that she reached the top level not only because of her extraordinary talent and discipline, but also because her family had the resources, education, and connections needed to survive a system that leaves many athletes behind. Her uncle chaired the Philippine Sports Commission, and her mother held a major executive position at Globe Telecom. Numerous other gifted young players would be absolutely crushed before they ever made it to the professional stage, but her family could afford the expenses, travel needs, foreign training, and logistical obstacles. And that's the hard reality. It is not a sustainable sport structure when a family's ability to pay for the holes the system refuses to fill determines success. It's a lottery. Even though the Philippines may have found its own version of Manny Pacquiao, it's possible that the nation still doesn't fully get what it takes to maintain Eala'S competitiveness at the top level. This is the point at which it is impossible to disregard the warning indications. If Eala'S is not regularly seeded in all four majors throughout the next two Grand Slam cycles by the end of 2027, despite her skill, prominence, and increasing influence, the reasons might no longer be concealed. The lost chances, the last-minute tournament issues, the interrupted training plans, the sponsorship restrictions, and the cumulative travel obstacles. All of this could turn into quantifiable proof of a structural disadvantage that is directly linked to a passport with restricted international mobility. And keep in mind something crucial when the mainstream tennis media ultimately begins to discuss the topic in public. Long before they chose to recognize them, the warning flags were clearly apparent. Because Eala'S passport is more than a human interest angle or side tale. It is a commercial and competitive barrier that affects athletes from nations with less mobility throughout the tour. For years, professional tennis has mostly disregarded this issue, which the Philippines has previously paid for in another international